Hello, how are you, Barry? How's your book tour so far?
Oh, it's going well, thanks, so far. Enjoying it, meeting lots of interesting people, having lots of interesting discussions about South Africa.
Yeah, now, talking about South Africa, could you just give us a little bit of your background? You're South African by birth.
I am, yes. I'm South African by birth. I was involved in the student movement during my university days, then had to go into exile in 1976, joined the ANC, the African National Congress, abroad, then went for military training with the ANC's armed wing in Angola. The ANC then sent me to Moscow for intelligence training. Then I served in the ANC's intelligence structures in Botswana from 85 to 89. Returned to South Africa in 91 and then served in the democratic government in various capacities from 95 until I retired in 2007. In the intelligence structures, I also headed the Department of Home Affairs and then ended my government career as coordinator for intelligence.
Okay, and so that's a brief synopsis of who you are. However, it's not very well known that there were white South Africans who were involved with the ANC. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how you personally got involved with the ANC?
Well, one thing about the ANC's anti-apartheid struggle, it was always, from early days, very much a non-racist, non-racial struggle. You did indeed have white people and people of Asian and other origins involved in the liberation struggle from way back. In my own case, I was politicized mainly at university, recognized that apartheid was a bad thing, and felt that, normal kind of student protest and demonstrations was not enough, that one had to get involved together with black people in the struggle for the end of apartheid, and that's how I got involved. My book explains it in some more detail, but I'm not as unusual as you might think. There were quite a few white people who were involved in the liberation struggle.
Okay, now, why did you... it's kind of interesting that you ended up being trained as a spy in Moscow. How did that come about?
Well, as I'm sure you know, the ANC received a lot of support from the then Soviet Union as well as other countries around the world. In particular, support with military training and other types of training. I finished my military training with the ANC, as I said earlier, in Angola, and at the end of my training, I was asked, well, what do you want to do now? And I said, I want to go home and fight. And my leader said to me, well, not all of us can go home and fight. Is there anything else you might want to do? And I thought, oh, well, intelligence might be interesting. And they then arranged with the Soviets to send me to Moscow for training. And there's a chapter in the book which describes that training in some detail in my experience there.
Mm-hmm. And wasn't it kind of strange for you as a white Jewish person to go to the Soviet Union to be trained? At that time, the media in the West was saying that Jews were not particularly welcome in the Soviet Union.
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question because my Jewishness was not that relevant to me. I didn't pick up that kind of attitude in the Soviet Union. And a number of Jewish South Africans, white Jewish South Africans, were involved in the struggle, had close ties with the South African Communist Party from the early days, and therefore with Moscow. So I didn't particularly pick up any concerns and didn't notice anti-Semitism in my contacts with the then Soviet Union.
Okay, now you come back and you're in Angola, and what are you doing in those years before the breakthrough and the release of Nelson Mandela? What was it that you guys were doing at the time?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I was sent by the ANC to Botswana, which neighbors South Africa, and eventually headed up the ANC's intelligence and security structure that operated from Botswana. We were responsible for sort of one half of the country of South Africa. And our role really was to collect intelligence, military, political, economic, and other intelligence that would assist us in the struggle against apartheid, and also to secure the ANC against the attacks and infiltrations of the apartheid security services. So that was my role, but I also served on what was called the Regional Political Military Committee of the ANC in Botswana. So we were responsible for overseeing political and military and intelligence work inside South Africa. The struggle against apartheid, as led by the ANC, had four main pillars, as we called it: the armed struggle, mass mobilization, the underground struggle inside South Africa, and the international solidarity. So my role and the role of the people I worked with in Botswana was on the first three pillars, largely.
Then the ANC takes over, and you switch from being on the outside to the inside on intelligence in South Africa. What was that? What was the difference for you? I mean, and what were the issues that you faced in those early days? It was pretty rocky, and it didn't seem as if the country might have made it.
Well, one of the very interesting experiences which I relate in the book is our attempt to transform state intelligence from its apartheid days into a democratic intelligence service or community for South Africa, and we had to do so with using intelligence officers from the old regime and from the ANC. And that was a very challenging period and a very challenging experience, because we came, if you like, from the sharp end of the struggle against apartheid. We suddenly were now colleagues having to decide what was the role of intelligence in a democratic country, which apartheid South Africa had not been.
And also, I'm very interested. You were a member of MK, which was the South African military. The ANC military wing, and now the people that you had to deal with on the state level were the people you were fighting against.
People who were trying to kill us. Yeah. Well, that's why I say it was a very interesting and challenging time. What was interesting when we worked on transforming the intelligence service, we did so in a very structured and meticulous way. And every aspect of the new intelligence dispensation was negotiated, from the big picture, the constitutional imperatives, the laws that were put in place, the oversight mechanisms, and then the new structures, and right down to who would serve from the different sides in the new structures. And once we were in the new intelligence structures, we had to negotiate what our intelligence priority should be, how we would work, what would be legitimate targets of interest to the intelligence in a democratic South Africa. So it was a very challenging, but very interesting and quite exciting time. And as I say, I describe that in some detail in the book. And we faced a lot of hurdles and obstacles and sometimes plain obstructionism on the way. But I think eventually we settled down into some kind of normality.
Any particular incident that you can that you've talked about in your book that you can bring to give listeners a sense of a very specific incident in which you had a tough time and you had to overcome?
Well, I think I can't think off the top of my head of a specific incident, but perhaps by way of some examples. when the ANC took over government, of course, in my first deployment in the intelligence services, I was deployed in the Foreign Intelligence Service, which was focusing on the outside world. And of course, we had to sit and agree with which countries we would have intelligence cooperation, what the nature of that cooperation would be. We had inherited, to a large part, the relationships of the old apartheid intelligence services, and we had to renegotiate all those. It meant traveling extensively to all parts of the world, including to the United States, and negotiating new intelligence relations and cooperation. And what was interesting was the extent to which different countries in the world would try to influence us to see the world in through their own security glasses, if you know what I mean, to share in their concerns. Well, we tried to maintain some kind of independence and even-handedness in the way we related to the outside world. Later, when I served in the domestic intelligence service, of course, the challenges were about what we would regard as domestic security threats or concerns, because South Africa remained and still remains to some extent a very divided country. One of the threats we faced was from the extreme right wing, which was mainly hardline Afrikaners who were not happy about being ruled by a black government. And some of them took to armed actions and other forms of terrorism and right-wing activities. And now to try and work on those groups with people who might have shared some sympathies with those groups was very difficult and very challenging.
Mm-hmm. And also, what would you say about the ANC today? And it's been almost 20 years now. I seem to, from the news reports we get, that there is some disillusionment with the ANC not being able to deliver all the high hopes that the population had. What's your feeling about where we are now with the ANC, and is there a possibility that some other party might emerge in South Africa that would effectively challenge the ANC and win over the government?
That's an interesting question, Ebong. In large part, I wrote my book to try and give people an insider's understanding of the kinds of challenges that the democratic government and the ANC in particular has had since 1994, when we had our first democratic election. We were not an opposition party that the electorate suddenly decided to give a chance at ruling. We were a liberation movement that headed up a decades, if not centuries-long struggle against racism and apartheid. And the challenges and obstacles and pressures that we faced made it very difficult for us to do the things that needed to be done. So in the book I tried to describe this, because most of the discussion in the media and so on does not recognize the difficulties we faced. But having said that, it's true that there is a moment now in South Africa where after 20 years people are impatient and getting a little bit angry that the expectations they had with the victory over apartheid are not being met quickly enough. So we're at quite a critical moment in South Africa's history. But on the last part of your question, I don't think there's any other party for the foreseeable future that would get the kind of support the ANC has from the majority. There are a number of older opposition parties that are there. There's some newer ones, but none of them, in my view, yet address the real support base that the ANC continues to enjoy. So it'll probably take quite a bit longer in South Africa for a viable challenger, if you like, to the ANC to really threaten their hold over the electorate.
Is there a possibility that a split could come within the ANC itself? because there has been the transition from Mandela to Thabo Mbeki was pretty smooth. The transition from Thabo Mbeki to Jacob Zuma wasn't as smooth. Is that a possibility?
Well, what you say about the transition from Mbeki to Zuma is true, and I do touch on that in the book too, where the very sad thing was that those differences between them led to factionalism in the ANC, which still persists to some extent. You probably know that there was an attempt to create a breakaway party in the form of COPE, the Congress of the People, which got, if I remember, 10 or so % of the vote in the 2009 elections. They were formed in 2008. They have kind of collapsed somewhat. There is now a new party led by Julius Malema, the former leader of the ANC Youth League, who was expelled from the ANC, called the Economic Freedom Fighters. They probably have appeal mainly to young black people, but there's no way of telling what sort of support they might get in an election. And yes, in the longer run, if there is to be an alternative to the ANC, it would probably come from within the ANC, of some sort of split to the left, I would argue, from the ANC.
Mm-hmm. And for you now, looking forward, how do you feel about the new South Africa? How do you feel about this South Africa that you fought so hard to bring about, and its chances of thriving into the future? And you might want to deal with its relationship with the rest of Africa as well.
Look, I think it's important to say first that we've achieved a lot since 1994, and I'm not going to list statistics of the things we have achieved, but we sometimes forget, because of the enormity of the challenges we still face, what we have achieved. So I'm generally pleased about the new South Africa, and I'm optimistic for its future, but concerned or worried about the huge inequalities that continue and sometimes even intensify in the country. The continuation of poverty, homelessness, and other challenges that we face. And I do have some concern about whether we are politically united and focused enough as a movement or party to address those challenges proactively and energetically. But overall, I'm optimistic. I think South Africa and its people and the ANC have proved themselves to have a depth of resource, if you like, that they've always managed to draw on eventually in times of difficulty. So in general terms, I'm optimistic. As one of the things that makes the ANC a strong organization, it's very good at understanding what its challenges are. I keep saying, as I'm on this tour of the U.S., that there's nobody who can criticize the ANC from the outside about things that the ANC doesn't know about itself. And that, for me, is a source of strength. It's just a question of making things happen to address those weaknesses and those failures.
Mm-hmm. And what about the relationship of South Africa with the rest of Africa? I mean, we had a situation where a lot of Africa was vested in the anti-apartheid movement, and it seems with the end of apartheid that a lot of Africans from other countries came to South Africa, and then we've had these upheavals from time to time where there's a resentment of Africans from other countries who have settled in South Africa.
Yeah, that's a very sad feature of post-apartheid South Africa. It can be explained, if explained is the right word, by the fact that given the huge inequities in South Africa, and the competition for resources and opportunities and jobs and so on, as happens in many other countries where there are economic challenges, citizens resent foreigners who appear to be taking up taking up those opportunities and jobs and so on. So you get sort of feelings on the ground of resentment. But from a policy point of view, both the ANC and government are very clear on combating xenophobia and trying to make our people understand and reminding them of how we were looked after in the countries of Africa when we were refugees. But it is a sad aspect of post-apartheid South Africa.
Okay, and you still, Barry Gilder, remain as optimistic in the future of South Africa as you were when you were in the bush fighting the apartheid regime?
Well, that's an interesting way of putting that question. When I was in the bush, I didn't know for sure that I would ever get home again, that we would ever defeat apartheid. We used to say we would. We used to have slogans like "Victory is certain." But deep inside, we wondered, whether we would ever go home and whether we would ever see a free South Africa. So the fact that we did come home and we did see a politically free South Africa is something that many of us just thought was part of our wildest dreams. And yes, one has a concern that the kind of vision we had for South Africa at the time we were struggling has not yet been realized. But as I say, what we have achieved and the recognition of our weaknesses and challenges gives me continued hope and optimism that we will overcome the challenges. And the challenges that many other countries in the world, including this one, are facing at the moment.
So we've been talking with Barry Gilder. He's a South African who was involved in the liberation struggle and worked for many years in the security services of South Africa after independence. And his book is called Songs and Secrets, and it's pretty much an account of his life and his struggle as part of this larger struggle in South Africa and his role in that. And we really appreciate, Barry, your joining us and sharing with us some of your insights on the situation in South Africa. And you still live in South Africa?
I do, yes. I'm currently living temporarily in New Delhi, but I'm still based in South Africa, yeah.